this week, President Trump took decisive action to call on Turkish forces to stand down, to end the violence, to agree to negotiations. And today, I'm proud to report, thanks to the strong leadership of President Donald Trump and the strong relationship between President Erdogan and Turkey and the United States of America, that today the United States and Turkey have agreed to a ceasefire in Syria. The Turkish side will pause Operation Peace Spring in order to allow for the withdrawal of YPG forces from the safe zone for 120 hours. All military operations under Operation Peace Spring will be paused, and Operation Peace Spring will be halted entirely on completion of the withdrawal. Our administration has already been in contact with Syrian defense forces, and we have already begun to facilitate their safe withdrawal from the nearly 20-mile wide safe zone area south of the Turkish border in Syria. Let me say this also includes an agreement by Turkey to engage in no military action against the community of Kobani. And in addition, the United States and Turkey have both mutually committed to a peaceful resolution and future for the safe zone, working on an international basis to ensure that peace and security defines this border region of Syria. In addition to the settlement today with the ceasefire, Turkey and the United States mutually committed to the defeat ISIS activities in northeast Syria. This will also include an agreement renewed today to coordinate efforts on detention facilities and internally displaced persons in formerly ISIS-controlled areas. Also, Turkey and the United States agreed on the priority of respecting vulnerable human life, human rights, and particularly the protection of religious and ethnic communities in the region. I spoke to President Trump just a few moments ago, and I know the President is very grateful for President Erdogan's willingness to step forward and to enact this ceasefire and to give an opportunity for a peaceful solution of this conflict that commenced 1 week ago. For my part, I'm grateful for the President's leadership. I'm grateful for the more than 5 hours of negotiations with President Erdogan and his team that arrived at a solution that we believe will save lives. And let me also say I'm very grateful for this team, to be able to have alongside the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, our National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, Ambassador Jim Jeffries, and Ambassador David Satterfield. It was a great privilege. And each of the members of this team contributed equally to achieving this outcome, which is a great contribution to security in this region, and it's a great contribution to the strong and enduring relationship between the United States of America and Turkey. Lastly, I want to express my appreciation to millions of Americans who I know were carrying this moment in prayer. We heard from people all over the country whose hearts were heavy with the loss of life in this conflict over the last week, long to see it brought to an end. And I believe their prayers, the strong leadership that President Trump provided to this moment, and the cooperation with President Erdogan and Turkey has made this possible. So again, let me say, a week after Turkish forces crossed into Syria, Turkey and the United States of America have agreed to a ceasefire in Syria. It will be a pause in military operations for 120 hours while the United States facilitates the withdrawal of YPG from the affected areas in the safe zone. And once that is completed, Turkey has agreed to a permanent ceasefire, and the United States of America will work with Turkey, will work with nations around the world to ensure that peace and stability is the order of the day in this safe zone on the border between Syria and Turkey. With that, let me recognize Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your great work.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks. I think the Vice President said it well. I just wanted to add this thought. There obviously remains a great deal of work to do in the region. There's lots of challenges that remain, but this effort tonight sets the conditions for the successful resolution of this particular piece, which created enormous risk and a real risk of instability. And President Erdogan's decision tonight to work alongside President Trump to achieve this ends will be one that I think will benefit Turkey a great deal. Thanks. I know you want to take some questions.
Well, first, as you'll see from the agreement, part of our understanding is that with the implementation of the ceasefire, the United States will not impose any further sanctions on Turkey. And once a permanent ceasefire is in effect, the President has agreed to withdraw the economic sanctions that were imposed this last Monday. But make no mistake about it, President Trump was very clear. Well, let the Secretary also address that, but I can tell you that President Erdogan and I spoke at great length about the importance of protecting religious minorities in the region. President Erdogan also shared with me the perspective of many leaders in religious communities here in Turkey who had great concerns about violence and persecution taking place along the border. And so part of our agreement is to continue to work very closely to ensure that religious minorities can thrive and that religious pluralism is one of the characteristics of this safe zone for some time to come. Mr. Secretary?
Not only this, we've certainly heard from the Vice President. I heard from Christian leaders around the world who expressed much of the same concern that you just described. We think this reduction in violence, this ceasefire, reduces the risk of that. So we think this greatly contributes to protecting religious minorities throughout Syria and throughout the broader Middle East as well. This all obviously happens in the context of lots of religious challenges, lots of challenges of religious persecution in Iraq and other places. Well, we think this is an important contribution in that regard. The other thing is that we talked about at some length is that to the extent there are abuses that are identified, we'll ask each leader, certainly President Erdogan and his team and others, to investigate any allegations of abuse that have taken place.
And let me maybe add an addendum to that. One of the things I know the President and the American people are most proud of is the investment of hundreds of millions of dollars to help rebuild Christian, Yazidi, and other religious minority communities in the aftermath of the horrifying violence during the ISIS period, both in Syria and in northern Iraq. We'll continue to flow those resources to support those communities. But as you'll see from this agreement, it is a specific undertaking by Turkey and by the United States to ensure to protect religious minorities in the affected region. Sean Tandon.